because it reaches people where they are, is helping to connect so many of us who work at the edges of poverty and global health, and make sure that we are a part of the larger community of those who are trying to do good but often need more support.
It's a whole library in one thing. It's not me trying to drag textbooks everywhere. So I have the whole world right here. I like that.
We have quick access to information, especially for our nurse educators. It's easier to have a little screen and have that patient one-on-one, like a postpartum patient, a mom that just delivered a baby. Watch this video about what signs and symptoms you know when a baby's getting sick. So it's not when they're coming to the hospital for this acute situation.
Like Teresa here, where we brought her from South Sudan all the way to Kenya, and we're going to teach her for 18 months. But now she's going to go back and she's going to be all by herself. So she's going to have these mothers who are dying, or small children who need surgery, and she may have questions. She may have to be reminded of some of the things that she's been taught. And having access to any device that will save the lives of the women of South Sudan and the children is well worth a small amount of money.
I use it all the time for checking drug dosages and interactions.
You're going to take 2 tablets, and then in an hour, you're going to take another tablet.
Okay? Just one more tool in the toolbox.
One of the nurses was dealing with a pregnant mother. She had come in because she had a headache. When we took her blood pressure through the roof, it was actually unreadable. We were worried about preeclampsia. We were trying to think through the dosage of magnesium sulfate, and we couldn't find a drug index anywhere in the hospital, and we were able to look up the correct dosage.
I don't treat for high potassium levels every day, and this patient had very high levels of potassium, and this was fatal. But just looking at the device, I was able to get everything that I'm supposed to give, and the patient was healed.
What Healthy Villages means to me is really an opportunity to heal the villages. There are some challenges that we all face, but then there are also some challenges that are at a local level, and understanding that we may have some technology-enabled solutions and a unique talent to collaborate with others and connect, that we might be able to help engage and make a difference in the lives of others. Now, we're not going to solve all the world's problems, we understand that, but if we can have a positive impact on one life, that has to be good enough for us.
While I recognize I will never change the world in my lifetime, what I can do is move forward the needle a little bit. That is what Healthy Villages success is all about.
Thank you very much. It's now my pleasure also to introduce Peter Nelson, Chairman and CEO of Ag Innovation Group and a former partner of Memphis Bioworks, who will announce an exciting new partnership here in the state for innovation and economic growth in farming in rural areas. Peter.
Thank you. It's great to be here. It's great to be part of this partnership that we've sort of been talking about the last year. Also on behalf of our vibrant and resilient ag economy here in Tennessee, we welcome all of you all. It is a great time here in Tennessee to be thinking about collaboration around the world. We've got several different initiatives that are leading to that. So thanks again for the opportunity. The initiative, which is called Ag Launch, is a partnership between Memphis Bioworks Foundation, which is a life sciences economic development group, and our Tennessee Department of Agriculture. The initiative addresses global issues in the food and ag value chain by bringing together researchers, entrepreneurs, farmers, and this is very, very key to us. We believe the farmers, whether it's here in Tennessee or globally, are undervalued in the way we implement new technologies and new ideas. And so we make a huge effort to bring that forward. Agribusiness and investors to collectively solve problems. This is all about creating an implementation platform for collaboration. Ag Launch is the go-to organization providing capital and entrepreneurial resources to those that have new technology and want to see them brought forward into the farming and the food community, and those that are seeking to find new solutions. Today, as part of this partnership, we're offering an opportunity to all of you all to participate in our demo day and our innovation forum, which will take place at 3:30 this afternoon. The highlights of this session will be presentations from 6 startup companies from all over the United States and the world that will present their ideas on building a more profitable and efficient ag and food value chain. 2 quick kind of examples to whet your appetite. One is a company called Secure Food Solutions. This is a hyperspectral sensor technology for aflatoxin, which has got global ramifications in health, as well as creating problems for growers that are trying to bring products to market. This technology is being developed out of AERS, USDA, and Mississippi State, and we pulled that to a new company that's doing work both in the United States and abroad. Another one that's very interesting is called CalAR. It's based out of Islamabad and is already deploying in Pakistan in the dairy industry. It's a sensor tool that allows dairy farmers to manage both small and large operations more efficiently. So we hope that you'll join us this afternoon at 3:30. That's going to go to 5:30, and then we have a reception afterwards. So I feel a little bit bad. We're also piggybacking with the plenary that's going to be going on also at 3:30. So if you get done with that, please come over, or if you just want to join us for the reception. Again, we're very thankful for this opportunity to partner. We're looking for even more opportunities going into 2017 to work together that we can announce next year. So thanks again for having us, Scott, and the group.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Fareed Zakaria, Summit host and moderator.
It is a huge pleasure to be back, as always, and it's a pleasure to welcome familiar faces and new ones. This is, I think this has got to be the most exciting one yet, because we had that small matter of the elections last week. And I suspect that many of you want to try and make sense of some of it. I'm going to talk about it tomorrow night at dinner, so I'm not going to spend too much time giving you my views on it specifically. But everything is impacted by the election and the broader trends that the election was really about. And that's what I want to spend time this hour talking about here. Because at the end of the day, if there was a consistent theme that emerged from Brexit, from many of the votes that have taken place in Europe over the last 5 years, and from this recent one, it is a sense that there is a backlash to the globalization world that was created in the aftermath of the fall of the Soviet Union. From if you look back and think about the world created by that collapse, 11/9/1989. It was a world in which global trade flourished, the free flow of information flourished, and the free flow or freer flow of people accelerated. That was the kind of world that was being brought into being. And one wonders whether this election will mark some kind of a similar milestone, in being at the very least a change in phase, the way that Scott mentioned in his fascinating and stimulating remarks. Consider, for example, this. I just jotted this down because I was struck by it. Trade as a percentage of global GDP was at 60% in 2007. That was a doubling over the last 25 years. It is now, for the first time on a sustained basis, declined to 55%. Capital flows were at 16%, 1/6. They are now down to 2%. The flow of people almost everywhere has slowed down. 5 million fewer people over the last 4 years moving into Europe as before, and of course, as some of you know, the number of people entering the United States from Mexico has actually been negative for the last 3 years. So it'll be interesting as to what exactly that wall will do, but that's another matter. But in a way, it raises this broader issue, which is that will the kind of world that was coming into being, for good and bad, be fundamentally altered? The signal feature of the world taken as a whole was that inequality among nations has been declining dramatically over the last 25 years. Easiest to see in the dramatic rise of China, to a lesser extent India, but Indonesia, Brazil. Inequality among nations has been declining, but inequality within nations has been rising. So are we now entering a kind of different world in which those two trends will be reversed? Inequality among nations will declining, but inequality within nations will stop increasing. In other words, with the focus being less on growth and trade, and instead on redistribution. And finally, how does all this play itself out against the backdrop of a technological revolution that is in some ways responsible for more of the kind of effects that we describe, and yet seems somewhat unstoppable? It's not entirely clear how you would stop people from using, developing, and applying software. It's not clear how you would get people to stop transmitting digital goods, services, and information via the internet. And yet so much of commercial life now is, in a sense, digital life. So those are my sort of opening thoughts. And I thought what I'd do is I just ask everyone to take a first round and give us a sense of what they think this means. Why don't we start with Myron Brilliant, who is the Executive Vice President and Head of International Affairs at the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. This is a huge operation that he runs there, and has been dealing with these issues of particularly international trade for decades. Myron?
Well, first of all, you've raised a lot of issues that we could spend hours on and still not reach the consensus.
I'm used to television. You've got about, say, three minutes.
Short. Ray Bradbury, everyone read Ray Bradbury's Fahrenheit 451. I hope we don't go there. What I mean by that is there's a lot of good that has come from globalization. And we should not lose sight of the fact that if you look at relative terms, the poverty rate in just 30 years has gone down from 2 billion to 700 million, and it will continue to decrease. A lot of people have been brought out of poverty. During LBJ's time as president, 17% of Americans did not have indoor plumbing facilities. Today it's less than 1%. So a lot of good has come from technology and productivity, which, by the way, we are seeing a slower productivity in our society. But we cannot ignore the signals that have come, not just from Brexit and the elections in our country, that have been coming for now many years. That there's rising economic anxiety, not just in the world, but here in the United States. At the end of the day, Trump's election, you can count many things, but one thing you should know was a domestic revolution of sorts. And what it means for those of us who are proponents of global engagement, we've got to do a better job explaining the benefits. And we also have to rethink our strategy. For business, it means restoring confidence in business as a force for good. Because right now, the confidence level in business and in government and in NGO institutions is at an all-time low. So we have a lot of work to be cut out. I'm worried about our expanding trade agenda because America does better when we lead from the front, not from the rear. And it's not just about America's economic leadership that I'm worried about. It's our role as a policeman, and it's our role as a value leader. And so when you look at it from the chamber standpoint, from a business organization standpoint, I think there are fundamentally 4 things that we need to do. 1, invest in restoring confidence in business as a force for good. 2, I think it's important that we have a new contract with American workers, that we think through not just how we help retrain our workforce for 21st century challenges brought on by technology and other issues, but also how we provide job counseling, job assistance, job relocation services. 3, we must not retreat from proposing ways to expand and level the playing field for American business. So that doesn't mean saying no to trade agreements, but it does mean thinking through how best to represent America's interests around the world through commercial transactions. And finally, we've got to get on board with the contract to rebuild America's infrastructure and make us more competitive domestically. And that includes investment in education, includes recognizing we do better when we have an immigration system that encourages the free movement of goods and people. So we have a lot to do, and hopefully we'll get back to some of that in more detail.
But let me just press you on one thing. We were talking about this at lunch. The Trans-Pacific Partnership is dead formally. The investment, the TTIP, which is the investment partnership with Europe, is dead. The bilateral investment treaty with China is likely going nowhere. Is every trade deal now essentially history?
Well, Fareed, I don't like to use the word dead. I like the word phrase deep freeze, and because that gives us hope. And I think that TPP and TTIP and the negotiations with China for now are on deep freeze. They're on pause. They can't be dead. One, because if again we are going to be a force for good in the world, and we're going to encourage our values and our expertise and our technology and our innovation to spread across the world, we cannot retreat behind our barriers, called high walls to China or high walls to Mexico, whatever Trump is putting out there right now. And we got to give the new president time, President-elect Trump, time to assess what he really means behind some of those things that he had during the campaign season. I don't want to dismiss what he said during the campaign for you, but I also want to make sure that we don't give up the hope for having an economic agenda that encourages leveling the playing field. And that has to be done through trade agreements built regionally, multilaterally, and bilaterally.
Elizabeth Littlefield runs the Overseas Private Investment Corporation, and what you try to do is mobilize private capital to solve critical development challenges. I don't think the president-elect has spoken much about foreign aid, but I can kind of guess what his view on foreign aid is. I know you're in a government office position, so you're not going to comment on that, but tell me what this backdrop of slowing globalization or deglobalization could mean in the work you do.
Well, thank you very much, Fareed. I really liked what you said earlier about inequality amongst nations and within nations. To me, that's a very clear rubric. Clearly, the work of OPIC as the U.S. government's development finance institution is to work on both items, but in emerging markets and not domestically. And I have to say, last year was actually an extraordinarily positive year in many regards for international development. We had the Paris Climate Change Agreement. We had an extraordinary international consensus around the Sustainable Development Goals. So that was sort of an amazing year as a backdrop. And I can't say where I think that all that's going to go right now. But what's interesting to me is that, when you do a back of the envelope calculation about the costs of these agreements that the world has agreed to now, Paris Climate Change Sustainable Development Goals, and then the rebuilding of broken countries like Syria and Iraq, the price tag is $100 trillion, right? What's the total global aid for all countries annually? It's 135 billion with a B. That's trillion with a G, billion with a B. Of course, it's not even 1% of the total. So what I'd say, and this is where I come to Myron's point, which is business as a force for good, is in between that, the private sector is absolutely the major mover and shaker and driver of development in the world. Business as a force for good. And that's directly and squarely what OPIC's job is, to work with the private sector, channeling those resources and that energy in the service of development, creating jobs, creating clean water access, renewable energy, access to finance, etc. And what's interesting about that is, since when OPIC was carved out of USAID about 50 years ago, by Richard Nixon, in fact, and at that time, ODA, Overseas Development Assistance, was the vast majority of the flows from the US into these markets. And today, it's absolutely the opposite. For every dollar in aid, you have $7, $8, $9 in foreign direct investment. So the volumes have changed completely in the last 2 decades. But even more important than that, 20 years ago, the private sector wasn't investing in key social sectors. It wasn't even investing in the power sector. But today, you have private businesses that are in emerging markets. They're building the power plants. They're building, in some cases, privately owned transportation system. We all know about cell phones, but even in the last few years, we've seen private sector business, profitable models, investing in things like health clinics and rural schools, profitably. So that just means that there's been a huge shift from the responsibility of building the world's social infrastructure from the public sector. These things were once the exclusive domain of budgets, and now it's businesses that are doing it, small ones, big ones, General Electric, all the way down to the entrepreneurs. So I'm actually optimistic that we are seeing a shift from public funding of these resources to private, and with that comes job creation, innovation, tax revenues, and everything else that the private sector brings to these markets. So that's kind of a shred of optimism out there. I think we've unleashed the private sector. Business can't be stopped now by government. It's going to keep investing because it's found ways to do so profitably, and the opportunities and most of the world's customers are in these markets. So I don't think that's going to stop.
David Wilton, when you look at it, you're managing director at Morgan Stanley. How does this world, because you're dealing a lot with the private sector, and there are a lot of people who feel, look, governments can come and do all this stuff, but we're living in a free trade world already. Tariffs in the industrialized world are about 3%. This train has left the station. You can't turn it back. Would you agree?
I think so. We're talking about globalization. I think you can cease further engagement for a while. I don't think that you can roll it back very easily. If you try and pick through all the existing trade agreements and try and renegotiate them, or unilaterally stop them, the disruption will be massive. So I can't see things going in that direction. I can't see a slowdown in engagement. In my own particular field of impact investing, if I look at that, I don't really think that's going to be too affected by this particular change of government. I say that for two reasons. One is just the scale to which the interest is reached. If you go around, there's high net worth individuals, there's institutions in Japan, Australia, and Europe all interested in this. You can see the number of signatories in the United Nations Principles for Responsible Investing has climbed to 1,400, representing 40 trillion of assets. So I think that impulse in my field, that impulse towards investing with impact, has gone beyond anything that's going to be changed by this particular election. It's sort of reached escape velocity. Now, the other reason I think it's going to be sort of resilient is if you look at where the demand is coming from. It's not the investment experts who manage the money who are pushing this. It's not Wall Street saying you have to invest with impact. It's the people who are close to the owners of the money. So if you go around, I have a map that shows where there's most interest in impact investing and where there's least interest. And where there's most interest, it's because the owners of the money are quite close in contact with the managers of the money. So, for example, high net worth individuals, they run their own family office, they're close to that. Insurance companies, it's their own money. You go to the Dutch pension schemes, there's boards of members who tell the members what they would like to see. Australia and the super schemes, members can change super scheme. So the super schemes listen to what the members are interested in. And the message coming up from all those owners of capital is they're interested in sustainable investment as some part of their portfolio. So to an extent, it's a populist movement already. So for those two reasons, scale and where the demand's coming from, I don't really see that trend changing.
But let me press you on it. After all, this is a trend that reflects a certain kind of mood and concerns. People feel like they should be doing more with their money than just generating ROI. Could that change if there is a renewed focus on the idea that, well, we should be investing in communities, right here in the United States? I saw one of the supporters of the president-elect say this election was fundamentally about globalism versus nationalism. And if you apply that rubric to impact investing, couldn't that change some of the mood that is generating this populist kind of interest?
To the extent that this is a global movement, that was done somewhat. If you then just look inside the States at where American investors are interested, a very large number of the American high net worth individuals are already interested in investing in America, in preference to overseas. So that preference is already there. And the ones that are interested in investing overseas, certainly the ones I've met, I don't see that changing. Not in terms of moral imperatives or parochial imperatives. It may adjust if there's more volatility in emerging markets on a commercial basis. But in terms of people's personal interest and personal mission, I think those lines are already set.
Maya, when you look at this issue of how can policy affect things? I mean, do you think there's room for Washington to really screw things up?
Well, I would argue that we haven't done a great job over some period of time in getting things done that are important to our country. If you look at roads, if you look at bridges, and you look at the decay of our infrastructure, and then where you travel like I do, you go to places like China where they just jumped over the technology we have, high-speed train and things like that. So we have a lot of things we can do domestically. I thought the election, to me, more than anything else, was a wake-up call for all of us, because maybe it galvanizes us behind an agenda that makes our economy more competitive, and we redouble our efforts to invest in people, and we have to do that thinking through both the educational system that we have in our country, as well as the physical needs we have. And then I think we have to get out in front of what you and I talked about, the fourth industrial revolution, which is a subject for another time. But what is automation and technology going to mean for society, and what challenges is it going to present for us as a country?
So let me just ask you on the things you mentioned, because it seems to me to get something done on them, there are two things. One, you've got to take on some real shibboleths in the United States. For example, you talk about education, right? We are the only country, actually one of two countries in the OECD, where we spend less money on poor kids than on rich kids. Every other, including China, it makes sense, right? Poor kid needs more attention. And of course, it's because our educational system is funded through property taxes. Right. So you can have a school in Harlem that is dealing with the most needy kids, or in rural Michigan, but because the tax base is property taxes, that school is massively underfunded, and the school in Westchester is going to be. Secondly, you look at infrastructure, and what I'm struck by is the inability to really come to grips with the fact that this is going to cost lots of money. So even if you look at the President-elect's proposal, it's all kind of weird tax credits that not entirely clear how it would work. A lot of the things that you actually need are not covered by it. Even if you look at Obama's proposals, it was an infrastructure bank which would be leveraged 15-1, because nobody wants to bite the bullet and say, yeah, we have a massive infrastructure shortage and it costs money.
Okay, so what you're really getting at is compromise, because at the end of the day, we're going to have to make some compromises to advance the goals that you've outlined. You're being analytical, but you're laying out where there are splinters in our system. Some people want the current tax system, and some people, GE is a good example, they're beneficiaries of the current tax system. But a lot of small businesses don't get advantage from the current tax system and aren't able to get lending. So there's a lot of challenges that we face. One hopes that coming out of the election will be a recognition that nothing's going to go forward in our country without compromise and without Republicans and Democrats coming together. Now that sounds very simplistic, but the reality is that we'll know quickly, because the president-elect does seem to want to do something in infrastructure, but the question is in what areas and how do you pay for it? To pay for it, there's going to have to be a serious conversation about not just tax reform, but who's going to help pay for it? Are we going to pay for it by having a tax on the roads? Is that the answer? Is there going to be a gas tax? And how does that hit people? Because that hits people disproportionately. So I think these are the kinds of issues we're not going to know short term. But I can tell you one thing, the tone gets set by the president-elect, and he has to set a tone that says, I'm willing to cross over the aisles both ways to get things done in education and infrastructure. But Fareed, if I had the answer to whether these things are going to get accomplished. I will say one thing back to the agenda that I want to promote. 40 million Americans are tied to international commerce. 40 million Americans, their jobs are tied to international commerce. So I don't think there is a road ahead where we can isolate ourselves and get 3.5%, 4% growth. We're running at about 1.6 to 2% growth. So if we want to get to 3%, 3.5%, which by the way is a number that most economists say is a healthy economy in terms of job development, then we're going to have to include expanding trade or exports, as the president likes to talk about, and we're going to have to do these other things. And so one can only hope.
Elizabeth, when you look at the issue, of exports, because you're on the export council, do you think that people get the argument that exports produces jobs, or is it that they produce the wrong kind of jobs? These are very high-skilled jobs that it doesn't address this broader kind of mismatch that exists in the United States today.
So it surprises me, but was clear from the back and forth around the Ex-Im Bank and the reauthorization of the Export-Import Bank. You know about this all too well, Myron. That it was incredibly hard to explain to people how selling goods abroad creates jobs at home. But we know that to be true. We know it to be causal, in fact. In fact, frankly, even the business that OPIC is in, which is promoting investment, U.S. companies investing abroad, that too creates jobs back at home, because it's actually creating growth and opportunities in both the countries in which we invest, but also growing the entire pie at home. So I think it's very hard to explain that. I think most people that are voting haven't had a background in simple economics, or frankly many of them aren't business people. So I feel like we need to do a much better job explaining the relationship between international trade and prosperity at home. And also on the point you made about the infrastructure, need to invest heavily in infrastructure, I feel like a lot of people are saying, well, they're looking at the price tag of building that infrastructure, but not recognizing that in fact we have tools, such as OPIC, frankly, that know how to invest in these things, leveraging private capital to make that investment much less burdensome on the government budget. My agency are investing about $4 billion a year in projects abroad that are advancing development, but we make money every single year that we send back to the Treasury. So I find oftentimes between the public sector and the private sector, people tend to say, okay, here's a problem that the private sector won't do work by itself, build that road. So therefore the public sector needs to pay for it. Well, rather than saying, what is the smallest amount of government dollars that could be brought to bear to mitigate risk or to create incentives so that the private sector will finance that thing? And that's going to be a much, much smaller number than the overall price tag of that project. Was that clear?
Yeah, absolutely.
Fareed, can I just say here two quick things? One is, we need fact-based debates in our country. Too often, we don't have fact-based debates. Let me give you an example of this. Two quick examples. One is that we're proponents of the U.S.-South Korea Free Trade Agreement, which was something that was accomplished in President Obama's first term. It was started during President Bush's term. When we polled Americans about that, most Americans thought we were talking about North Korea, not South Korea. Number one. Number two, if you asked Americans, Fareed opened up with TTIP, okay? Less than 1% know what TTIP is. If you say we're in negotiations with Europe on a free trade agreement, they might not think that's a bad thing, but if you use this fancy acronym called TTIP, they have no idea. And why should they? We haven't done a very good job of explaining what we're trying to do. The difference between free and fair trade. That's another, I think we should talk about fair trade because I think Americans believe in the concept of fair. Free seems like we're giving something away. In the 1990s, when I was co-chair of a business coalition for U.S.-China trade, we were arguing for most favored nation status for China. Fareed, you know what Americans thought? We were giving China something away. By the way, only 6 other countries in the world didn't get most favored nation status. So the best thing we did was get congressional legislation to call it normal trade relations. So we weren't advancing something favorable for China, which is advancing normal trade relations. So part of it is the architect of how we talk about these things. We got to do a better job, and it starts with the business community, the leaders of the business community. It starts with our government institutions. Because when you poll Americans, they believe in trade, they believe in movement of people. But when you poll them on specific trade agreements, you lose them. And that's where our work is cut out.
So David, speaking of words and the actual import, what is impact investing actually? It sounds, is it like a feel-good thing that that people want to do, or are people actually willing to receive a lower return on their capital for the psychic pleasure of thinking they've done something good?
It all depends on who you're speaking to. It's a very, very diverse, wide spectrum of interests and also opportunities. So at the one end of the spectrum, there are definitely people and institutions who are willing to take a trade-off. But there are people whose impact focus is generally on fairly narrowly focused, or focused on something that isn't really very scalable. And to do that, you will have to take a trade-off. But it's a trade-off in both the quantity of impact and the returns. I'm not quite sure that people are aware of that. So if you're focusing, say you want to create jobs in Detroit using this case, you need to find a number of projects that you can scale in Detroit. There aren't so many of them. So as you push past the 2 to 3 deals that will really scale, in a private equity context, you do maybe 10 deals in a fund. So you find 3 that really do scale with the right profile. The rest of your money is going to 7 that don't. So they're going to throw out fewer jobs and lower returns. They trade off in both. Whereas if you take a portfolio approach to the impact, so you can go to things that really are scaling, that happens to be healthcare or Detroit or Ouagadougou, and you get the scale, then you get a lot more in terms of absolute impact numbers and you get the commercial returns. Now, you go and talk to some of the big institutions, they've got an absolute necessity to meet their members' needs, whether that's pensions, whatever that is. They're not going to compromise on returns. So at that end of the spectrum, you have to find those investments which do produce a portfolio of impact, real and measurable. It's not impact washing, but they have to take a portfolio approach to get the money deployed to get that sort of return. At the individual level, people can decide they want to do something quite specific, but for that there will be a trade-off. But so far, the two camps aren't really talking. So far, if you get into a room where there's people from all over the impact spectrum, the people who are prepared to take a trade-off will gather in that corner, and the institutions will be in this corner over here, and they'll stare at each other like they're different planets. There needs to be a dialogue to take place here, so that everybody sees there's a spectrum, and if you line all the opportunities up correctly against that spectrum, you get a lot more done than you get by standing in this corner or that corner.
I thought what I'd do at this point is we have a video presentation from Tamika Tillman, who is a leader in social finance and civic innovation. Serves as the director of the Bretton Woods Initiative at New America, actually Bretton Woods 2, the idea being the newly reimagined Bretton Woods. So what I thought is let's watch the video. He's not here with us, and then we'll open it up to a questions conversation with everyone here.
Hi there, I'm Tamika Tillman of New America, and it's a pleasure to speak with all of you at the Global Action Summit. I want to congratulate you on the incredible work you're doing. The conversations you're having, the solutions you're identifying are really at the heart of solving some of the planet's biggest challenges, and I applaud you for your efforts. I've been asked to say a few words about the Bretton Woods 2 program that I lead at New America. And this is an initiative that grew out of a series of realizations we had when I was serving as a senior advisor, first to Secretary Clinton and then to Secretary Kerry at the State Department. We recognized that a lot of the challenges that we were confronting around the world were incredibly expensive for the world's biggest asset owners. They lost a lot of money when things went wrong. And simultaneously, we also came to the conclusion that we needed new models for financing social impact work around the world. It was difficult to scale even the best solutions, and the resources that were required to do this work were very difficult to raise using traditional methods of philanthropy. And so we got together with some very smart folks in the finance sector and started looking at a few actors that have interests that align very closely over the long term with the rest of us. These are entities like pension funds, sovereign wealth funds, and endowments. Now, they have a couple of things in common beyond the fact that collectively they control about $25 trillion, which is a non-trivial pool of capital. The first thing is that they are all very long-term investors. They have multi-generational investment cycles, and they need to look years into the future when they're making their decisions. The second thing they have in common is they're totally diversified. They have exposure in markets and sectors all over the world. One of these funds alone, the Norwegian Sovereign Wealth Fund, is estimated to control 1% of all global stock markets. So when you put that in perspective, what it means, going back to my earlier comment, is that if there is a problem anywhere, it's going to cost them money. But the exciting thing, which we also recognize, is that these actors are big enough that they don't need to accept the world as they find it. They can use their investment strategies to help shape a landscape that is going to be more conducive to growth, more conducive to stability, and more conducive to prosperity over the long term. So we got together with some extraordinary partners, and together we identified 3 streams of work that we needed to pursue in order to take these insights and put them to work as part of a new business model for social finance. First, we needed better analytics. We needed good data that could help these asset owners identify investment opportunities that would both be profitable and deliver strong returns, and also help to address some of the challenges at the heart of global instability. Now, it turns out this is a lot easier than you might expect. Robert Eccles out of Harvard did a study a while back, and he looked at 2 identically matched groups of companies. One group was focused on addressing the world's biggest challenges, and another peer group that in many instances came from the same industries, came from the same sectors, the same size of companies, was not. They had not adopted policies that helped them focus on social, environmental, and governance considerations. And what he found over a 17-year cycle is that companies in that first group who were doing things right outperformed their peers by 400 basis points annually. Over the lifespan of a long-term investment, that translates into a spectacular amount of money. So we're seeing very strong data that it's possible not only to do this work, but to do it profitably. It's not just the right thing to do, but it's also the smart thing to do. The next thing that we've been focused on is using advocacy to push out tax and regulatory strategies that can channel more resources into these types of investments. We've seen some big progress in this already. Just a year ago, there was a huge change in the US regulatory environment. Prior to this shift in regulation, if you were a fiduciary of a US pension fund and in charge of making investment decisions, the only factor that you could consider by law when determining how to allocate those resources was financial return. Thankfully, the administration came out with some new rules after we and a lot of other folks pushed hard that have opened the door to asset owners considering a wide range of environmental, social, and governance considerations. And the Secretary of Labor, who supervises these regulations, went so far as to come out and say, in many cases, these should be the primary factors driving investment decisions. There were maybe 17 people in Washington who cared about that change in regulation, but it has had the effect of opening $5 trillion for potential use in social impact and development-related investments. We think there's a lot more good work to be done in that space, especially as part of a potential rethink of the tax code down the road. Finally, we've been focusing on developing the financial instruments and mechanisms that are required to put capital into the field efficiently and effectively. We partnered with some extraordinary technology firms and the National Democratic Institute to build out blockchain-based solutions that will allow us to track social impact investments more efficiently and effectively. And we're working with a wide range of international partners, including the Canadian government's new Convergence platform, to create marketplaces, funds, and vehicles that will allow these very large asset owners to deploy capital at scale to help solve the world's biggest problems. Together, we call this the Bretton Woods II agenda, and we think it represents an unprecedented opportunity to make an investment in the future of humankind. We hope that all of you at the Global Action Summit will focus on new solutions for the same types of challenges that we're working to address, and we look forward to partnering with you in the months and years ahead. Thank you.
David Wilcox for HCL. David used the term scale 5 or 6 times during his last comment. Tamika just talked about deploying capital at scale. Many of us in this room have spent time trying to deploy global north models in the global south, and in almost every case it fails. So one question is, what's the largest current attempt to deploy global north models in the global south? I would suggest the name of that attempt is impact investing. So that begs the question, if impact investing isn't scaling and it's actually flat year over year, the most recent 2 years, which shocked the hell out of me and everybody I talked to, maybe it didn't, the people inside. If impact investing isn't scaling and yet scale is the thing that we need, what is it that we need to change in our thinking to find the South models that are either already scaling and we don't know about it, or that could scale if instead of us bringing the solutions, we went there and scaled, helped them scale, which I would argue global corporates would be the optimal partners to do it and not doing it at all. So how do we change our thinking such that we get the right assets in the corporates, in the development world, and so on, together with new models for investing that give credit for the progress on the SDGs and the profit progress in different mixes and in different amounts?
Yeah. So, in terms of South models, I think you're right. And in fact, everything that I'm investing in, we're looking for people in these countries local who are doing things. We're not trying to break things down from outside, so I agree with you on that point. On the scaling, I was saying over lunch, I wasn't too surprised that things were flat. But I think the issue really is matching the opportunities with the people who have the capital and recognizing that the people who have the capital, big superannuation funds, all these large groups, firstly, they're not going to take a trade-off on their returns. They have obligations to meet.
You know, we've got it.
Yeah, they're not going to take the trade-off there because they have actuarial models, they need to meet that. So until you change the entire way the actuarial world thinks, and these people think, you're not going to get people taking trade-offs. And I mean, they need the financial returns. And so the fact that you might give someone emotional credits for creating a job here or something's like that, that's not a decision that an asset manager can make. Now, there are wealthy individuals who will make that decision with pots of money that they have, which are not part of their main portfolio. That they view them as part of their charitable, philanthropic activities.
That could be done through aid or... That could be done that way. It can be done through draft ways to other accounts.
I've been given the signal that we have time for one more question. We were having too much fun up here, so still at the back there you go. I think that somebody will get a mic to you.
Thank you. I'm Chris Hornsby. I'm a student from Sewanee University of the South. And my question is in regards to being economically competitive. When we look at countries like China who consider to be economically competitive, they also have severe environmental degradation. So when we're talking about what that looks like here, how do you consider the potential environmental environmental degradation of industries like the oil and automobile industry and industrial agriculture when the air is already unfit to breathe and the water is unfit to drink?
You want to take that one?
Well, and I would say that is a loaded question on many levels. I think there is no question that U.S. companies practice the best environmental standards of any country in the world. There's no question that when we operate here or abroad, we have the highest environmental standards. Can we do more? Can we use technology to improve communities to deal with water systems? I mean, it's a shame that we still have the problem in Flint, Michigan. By the way, President Obama going and drinking a glass of water is not going to fix the problem. So yes, we have huge issues in our country, and water sustainability is one of those issues. Just ask people in California and other parts of the country. But I think if you're looking for government to answer all of that, that's not going to happen. it needs to be a public-private partnership here as it does elsewhere. And I think companies are investing in technologies that will enable us to deal with the environmental challenges we have. After all, this is the underlying purpose of this conference.
Let me just double check though. Your point was how do we get more competitive without sacrificing on the environment?
Yes.
Correct? Yeah, I think that the argument is not that we're doing badly, but the point is there a danger of a race to the bottom if you try to get more and more competitive?
Well, I think not. I think there's a race to the top because it's frankly profitable. Ultimately, and that's really what you're talking about.
Yeah, I mean, if I can just say, in my own portfolio, investing for the last 15 years, there's a definite positive return on good ESG compliance.
Okay.
Certainly in emerging markets, if you want to, there might be some cost up front in cleaning up a company, but if you want to exit it to a buyer coming in from offshore with the mainly trade sales, they want a clean company. So you get it on the exit and the multiple and the liquidity. So there's and it's because in supply chains,
So just let me ask a simple question. You're making a car, you could make it in China where you can spew out all kinds of chemicals into the water.
But that's changing.
It's changing, but there's no question there's still a gap.
Yeah.
Or you could do it in the United States, and you have the privilege of paying more for your workers. I think what he's asking is, how do you address that gap?
but the Chinese are already in trouble with their own people.
I understand, but it's still true that there is a big difference.
But that's going to change.
But that doesn't answer the question. Today, if you were to choose
No, what I'm saying
to
is
make
that-
a car,
Over time, Chinese costs are going to go up because they haven't addressed that problem. The Communist Party can't stay in the past.
but environmental regulations today are much more severe in the United States than they are in China. So,
But again, I go
telling
back-
us that you notice that there is this groundswell in China and they've begun to talk about it, and 20 years from now, probably they'll have the same environmental regime. The reality is you can make a car more cheaply in China.
Yeah, but you can make it more cheaply historically because of the wage.
Labor,
Labor was a big factor. I'm telling you, U.S. companies are going to go to China and have double standards from where they are here because it's not going to help them globally with their supply chains. So we're forgetting that you look at a Ford or a GM, and I know Ford was criticized by President Trump during the campaign. The fact is that Ford sources from all over the world. It doesn't just manufacture and assemble in one place, right?
But the product you get, what we're talking about is the process by which you get the product. You may get the auto part and what it took to make it and how much externality you spewed into the air and water is entirely different. The ball bearing will still look cool.
The ball bearing. So there's a gap that has existed, no question, in terms of how China and emerging nations have looked at environmental standards. But that gap is down. And I believe that U.S. companies will tell you that they're not going to China for that purpose. They're going to China because there's a market in China to sell their products.
I mean, as an investor, I wouldn't bet on the strategy of using a pollution arbitrage and producing more cheaply in China now. The Chinese government, the last they've a catalogue of all the things you can and can't do as a foreign investor. About every 2 or 3 years, it's all the management systems are really easy to use. So, if you go back Atlas to go through the last one they brought out last year, it's got the biggest list of changes they've made in 10 years. And a lot of it is around the environment. They're wanting the technology to come in, they're taking it seriously. Now, you're right, it'll take some time, but you can see the attitude change there. So I wouldn't bet on the pollution arbitrage.
Elizabeth, last word before we...
Well, it's certainly my belief that with the enthusiasm for sustainability we see among especially the young population in this country, that it's not going to be too long before every single consumer product will have a sticker on it. This is exactly what the greenhouse gas emissions were to produce that product. And that day, I think, will be the great leveler because we know people care. We know people look at sustainability as a factor in their buying, in their purchases. So I think we're headed in that direction. I think the smash and grab capitalism, which is frankly still very much the way of doing business in many countries in the world, is less and less so in the West. So
I will leave you with a question: whether or not we end up in that situation when a Republican Congress, House, and President who all say they hate regulations because what you're talking about, it sounds very cool, is more regulation, right? It's the only way to get that.
Not more regulation.
Pleasure. Thank you all very much. Fascinating conversation.
Ladies and gentlemen, please proceed to the track rooms for sessions on food, health, and prosperity.
Student fellows, please join Fareed and Scott Massey on stage for a group photo.